Hi everyone, my name is Mark, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Albert Stauch first met Letecia Hardin in 2014 during one of the most challenging periods of his life. Albert was going through a difficult divorce from his first wife, Landen Hiott, with whom he shared two young children, Gannon, born in 2009, and his daughter Laina, born in 2012. The separation was painful for everyone involved, and both Albert and Landen had struggled with infidelity during their marriage. As their relationship crumbled, Albert found himself seeking solace and companionship elsewhere. Letecia, who had previously been married to a man named Hunt and had a daughter named Harley from that relationship, worked as an elementary school teacher specializing in special needs children. She had moved to Colorado from South Carolina, leaving behind a complicated past that included a lengthy criminal record spanning over 20 years. Her first known felony had occurred in 2001 when she was arrested for stealing a car, but her pattern of deceptive behavior had begun even earlier. While still in high school, she had made a fake bomb threat, demonstrating an early willingness to manipulate and deceive others for her own purposes. When Albert and Letecia began dating, she presented herself as a devoted Christian woman who shared his faith and values. Albert, who was a full-time member of the Army National Guard, was drawn to her apparent dedication to God and her work with children. Letecia couldn't help but portray herself as the perfect stepmother figure, someone who would love and care for his children as if they were her own. She seemed understanding about the complexities of his situation and supportive of his military career, which required frequent relocations and deployments. What made Letecia particularly appealing to Albert was her apparent stability and her profession as a teacher. Albert had grown up in a military family and understood the importance of having a strong partner who could handle the demands of military life. She loved that Albert felt the same way about faith and family values, and she found comfort in their shared beliefs. To the outside world, Albert and Letecia appeared to be a couple who had found happiness after their previous failed marriages, their relationship seeming filled with hope and the promise of a blended family. However, beneath the surface, there were troubling signs that would later become evident to investigators. Letecia's past was more complicated than she had initially revealed. In South Carolina, she had lost her job at a school and had her educator's certificate suspended after abandoning her position without proper notice. She had claimed harassment and retaliation, alleging that the district superintendent's niece was her husband's ex-wife, but these claims remained unsubstantiated. According to sources, she had been fired from her 3 most recent teaching jobs, establishing a pattern of workplace conflicts and professional instability. It was only a matter of time before Albert decided to propose to Letecia. Despite having known her for less than a year, he was convinced that she was the partner he needed to help raise his children and build a stable home. In January 2015, just over a year after Letecia divorced her first husband, Albert and Letecia were married in a ceremony that seemed to promise a fresh start for both of them and their children. Initially, Gannon and Laina continued to live primarily with their mother, Landen, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, while their new stepmother, Letecia, worked to establish herself in their lives. The children would shuttle back and forth between households for holidays and summer breaks, which created stress for both sides of the family. During this time, Landen had remarried a man named Mike Hiott and was pregnant with her 3rd child, a daughter she would name Nova. As time passed, Albert grew increasingly concerned about the children's safety at their mother's home. He worried about drugs being present around them, which was presumably related to Mike Hiott's behavior and lifestyle. These concerns, combined with his desire to have his children closer to him, led Albert to pursue more custody time with Gannon and Laina. Letecia appeared supportive of this decision, presenting herself as eager to take on a larger role in the children's lives. The family had relocated several times due to Albert's military assignments, which put additional strain on their relationship. Letecia wanted to live beyond their financial means, which caused significant relationship issues between her and Albert. She had grown frustrated with the constant moves and the responsibilities that came with caring for Albert's children. What investigators would later discover was that Letecia's feelings about her role as a stepmother were far more complicated than she let on. While she maintained a facade of caring stepmother in public, evidence would emerge suggesting that she harbored deep resentment toward her stepchildren, particularly Gannon. She had begun to view him as a burden rather than the child she had once claimed to love as her own. On January 27, 2020, just before 7 p.m., the El Paso County Sheriff's Office dispatch received a call about a missing child from the 6600 block of Mandan Drive in the Lorson Ranch neighborhood of Colorado Springs. The caller was Letecia Stauch, reporting that her 11-year-old stepson Gannon had not returned home after going to visit a friend. Letecia told the dispatcher that Gannon had left home between 3:15 p.m. and 4 p.m. to walk to a friend's house, but had never returned. She explained that Albert, Gannon's father, was away in Oklahoma for a military training assignment, leaving her to care for Gannon and his younger sister. The initial classification was that of a runaway child, and at 7:32 p.m., Gannon was entered into state and national databases as an active runaway. When instructed to call the non-emergency number for a more detailed report, investigators immediately noticed troubling inconsistencies in Letecia's story. She was unable to name any of Gannon's friends or their parents, and she couldn't recall where any of these supposed friends lived. For experienced officers who had handled many missing child cases, this raised immediate red flags. Any caregiver should know basic information about a child's social circle, especially an 11-year-old's close friends. Deputies with the El Paso County Sheriff's Office arrived at the Stauch home around 10 p.m. that evening. The officers found Letecia presenting herself as a concerned stepmother, but her behavior struck them as odd from the beginning. She seemed more focused on controlling the narrative than on the urgent need to find a missing 11-year-old child. Her unease grew as she attempted to maintain her story while fielding questions from experienced investigators. The next day, January 28, 2020, at 12:29 p.m., the case was turned over to El Paso County Sheriff's Office investigators. Detectives immediately began conducting interviews, collecting surveillance footage, and following up on additional leads. The initial classification of Gannon as a runaway troubled those who knew him well, including family members who insisted that Gannon was not the type of child to leave home without permission. As investigators dug deeper, they quickly realized that the circumstances Letecia described simply didn't align with what they were learning about Gannon's personality and past behavior. By January 30th, 2020, just 3 days after the initial report, the case was upgraded from runaway to endangered missing child, indicating that investigators had developed serious concerns about what had actually happened to Gannon. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office requested additional resources from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the FBI Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team. This escalation demonstrated the seriousness with which law enforcement was treating the case, and their growing suspicions that something far more sinister than a simple runaway situation had occurred. On January 31st, 2020, Letecia Stauch spoke exclusively to local news reporter Spencer Wilson, presenting herself as a devastated stepmother, desperate to find her missing stepson. To those who didn't know the family well, she appeared genuinely concerned, but investigators were growing increasingly suspicious of her behavior and her constantly changing story. On February 3rd, 2020, a crucial break in the case occurred when a neighbor came forward with home surveillance video. The footage showed a driver and passenger getting into a truck on the day Gannon went missing, but only one person was seen returning. This video evidence directly contradicted Letecia's claims about Gannon's movements that day and provided investigators with a timeline that would prove crucial to building their case. The surveillance footage showed Letecia and Gannon leaving the house together around 10:15 a.m. on January 27th, but the return journey around 2:19 p.m. showed only Letecia coming back home. This visual evidence was devastating to her story and marked a turning point in how investigators viewed the case. They now had proof that Letecia had been the last person to see Gannon alive and that her account of his disappearance was demonstrably false. What followed was one of the most extensive missing child searches in Colorado history. Literally, thousands of hours of investigation were conducted, with hundreds of tips pouring in from concerned community members. The FBI Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and the Colorado Springs Police Department all assisted the El Paso County Sheriff's Office in the massive search effort. Search teams used every available resource. Drones, search dogs, horses, helicopters, and divers combed through various areas of interest around Colorado Springs and beyond. The community rallied around the search for Gannon, with volunteers dedicating countless hours to finding the missing boy. Gannon's biological parents, Albert and Landen, made emotional public pleas for his safe return and thanked the community for their overwhelming support. Throughout this massive search effort, Letecia maintained her deceptive facade, even participating in some search activities while knowing exactly what had happened to Gannon. She continued to give interviews to local media, presenting herself as a concerned stepmother, but investigators were documenting every inconsistency in her statements and behavior. As the investigation progressed, Letecia's story changed dramatically multiple times, each version more elaborate and unbelievable than the last. On February 2nd, 2020, she told Albert that a man had broken into their home, raped and attacked her, and then abducted Gannon. When Albert asked why there were no signs of a struggle in the house, she replied that she had cleaned it up because she was scared. This fabricated story included increasingly detailed elements designed to deflect suspicion from herself. She claimed the attacker's name was Eduardo and provided elaborate descriptions of the assault and kidnapping. She told investigators that after the attack, she had cleaned up the area before reporting Gannon missing, explaining away any physical evidence that might contradict her story. Law enforcement officials, experienced in recognizing deception, noted that Letecia's behavior during interviews was highly suspicious. She would arrive with prepared notes and seemed more focused on controlling her narrative than on providing information that might help find Gannon. During one interview, she began stuffing tissues down her pants and claimed she was having breathing problems and heart issues, prompting a trip to the hospital. After being medically cleared, she slipped out of the building without informing law enforcement, behavior that further raised suspicions about her involvement. As investigators examined Letecia's digital footprint, they uncovered disturbing evidence that painted a very different picture of her mental state than what she projected publicly. Her internet search history revealed queries that would prove crucial to understanding her motivations and planning. Intelligence analyst Kevin Clark later testified about Letecia's phone activity patterns, which were highly unusual on the day Gannon disappeared. Typically, Letecia used her phone frequently throughout the day, but on January 27th, there were notable periods when her phone showed no activity, specifically during the time when she claimed to be out with Gannon at a pet store, and again when she returned home. This digital silence aligned perfectly with the time frame when investigators would later determine the crime had occurred. The investigation also revealed that Letecia had conducted searches about when a body starts to decompose, how to pass fake polygraph tests, and most disturbing of all, searches specifically about "I hate my stepson." These digital breadcrumbs painted a picture of someone who harbored deep resentment toward Gannon and was actively planning something sinister. On March 2, 2020, after weeks of investigation and mounting evidence, Letecia Stauch was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, on charges of first-degree murder of a child by a person in a position of trust, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with physical evidence. Her arrest came after investigators had gathered sufficient evidence to establish probable cause for her involvement in Gannon's disappearance and presumed death. During her extradition back to Colorado, Letecia made national headlines when she allegedly attacked a deputy, demonstrating violent tendencies that supported investigators' theories about her capability for violence. This incident provided further evidence of her unstable and dangerous behavior when faced with consequences for her actions. Following Letecia's arrest, Albert filed for divorce, stating in court documents that their marriage was irretrievably broken. He also noted in his filing that his wife was in South Carolina awaiting extradition to Colorado, charged with first-degree murder of his son. The divorce proceedings marked the end of a marriage that had brought nothing but tragedy to the Stauch family. On March 17, 2020, bridge inspectors with the Florida Department of Transportation made a discovery that would finally reveal the full extent of Letecia's crimes. While doing routine construction work under the Escambia Bay Bridge in Pace, Florida, they found a suitcase. Upon opening it, they discovered what appeared to be a boy's body, wrapped in blankets, more than 1,300 miles away from Gannon's home in Colorado. The scene was gruesome and heartbreaking. The remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, and the location seemed to have no connection to Gannon's life or family. The suitcase had been positioned under the bridge in a way that suggested someone had deliberately chosen this remote location to dispose of the evidence, hoping it would never be found. On March 20th, 2020, law enforcement announced that the remains had been confirmed to be those of Gannon Stauch, finally bringing the massive search effort to a tragic conclusion. The discovery of his body, more than 1,500 miles from home, raised new questions about how Letecia had transported his remains and the extent of planning involved in the cover-up. When Dr. Susan Ignacio, An associate medical examiner in Largo, Florida, performed Gannon's autopsy on March 18, 2020. The full horror of what Letecia had done to the innocent child was finally revealed. The medical findings painted a picture of extreme violence and suffering that shocked even experienced investigators and prosecutors. Gannon had sustained 18 sharp force injuries, indicating he had been stabbed repeatedly with a knife or similar weapon. The autopsy also revealed 4 blunt force injuries to his head, suggesting he had been beaten with an object. Most devastating of all, Letecia had shot 11-year-old Gannon with a handgun, the bullet entering his lower jaw and severing his spinal cord. The medical examiner testified that the injuries appeared to be intentional, carried out by someone who intended to kill the victim. Some of Gannon's injuries were consistent with defensive wounds, meaning the 11-year-old had fought desperately for his life against his stepmother's brutal assault. Dr. Ignacio called it a violent death, and noted that the injuries were intentional acts targeted toward the upper body, head, and chest area, indicating that the attacker wanted to cause fatal injuries. The autopsy also revealed that Gannon had been given hydrocodone before the attack. The prescription medication, which belonged to Albert for a finger injury he had sustained, was found in Gannon's system. The medical examiner noted that it was unusual to find this controlled substance in a child's system, suggesting that Letecia may have drugged him to make him more vulnerable or to facilitate the attack. Gannon's entire body had decomposed during the time it spent in the Florida location, with some of his bones showing, and he was still wearing the clothes he had died in. He had been wrapped in his own bed sheets and placed in the suitcase, treated like discarded trash rather than the beloved child he had been. With Gannon's body recovered and the autopsy complete, investigators were able to piece together the full scope of Letecia's crimes and cover-up efforts. The evidence showed that after killing Gannon in his bedroom, she had moved his body to various locations before ultimately transporting him across the country to Florida. Digital evidence from her phones revealed the extent of her planning and deception. She had conducted searches about fake polygraph tests and had actually purchased a fake polygraph examination online, later telling Albert that she had passed the test to maintain her innocence. Phone records showed that she had made calls from Gannon's phone after his death, including a call to his mother's phone at 10:03 p.m. on the night he was reported missing, when investigators knew Gannon was already dead. The investigation revealed that Letecia had rented cars and made multiple trips, including a journey to dispose of evidence and move Gannon's body. Intelligence analysis showed that when she drove to the airport to pick up Albert upon his return from Oklahoma, Gannon's body was actually in the back of her vehicle, demonstrating the callous nature of her deception. After years of legal proceedings and competency evaluations, Letecia Stauch's trial began in March 2023. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, claiming she suffered from dissociative identity disorder due to childhood sexual abuse. She also made wild accusations against Albert, alleging he was involved in Gannon's death, claims that were dismissed by the court as unfounded. The prosecution presented comprehensive evidence, including testimonies from investigators, forensic experts, and Albert himself. Albert recalled his heartbreaking final moments with his son, telling the jury he hugged Gannon and told him he loved him before leaving for his deployment. The defense relied on psychiatrist Dorothy Ottnow-Lewis, who argued that Letecia had suffered a major psychotic crack due to childhood trauma. However, the extensive evidence of planning and cover-up demonstrated Letecia's awareness of her actions. On May 8, 2023, after nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected Letecia's insanity defense and found her guilty of all charges. Before sentencing, Gannon's parents delivered heart-wrenching victim impact statements. His mother, Landen Hiott, said, "I pray that we will never have to look at her face again." Albert asked the judge to strip the defendant of her last name, not wanting her to carry any connection to their family. Judge Gregory Werner addressed Letecia directly. "I can, however, say without hesitation that the facts in this case are the most horrific I have ever seen. Your conduct in this case demands the maximum punishment that I can impose under Colorado law." Letecia Stauch was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole on 2 counts of first-degree murder, plus an additional 13.5 years for tampering with evidence and tampering with a dead body. Judge Werner offered words of compassion to Gannon's family. "I cannot fathom the pain Mr. Stauch and Ms. Bullard have experienced as a result of the defendant's actions." He also addressed Letecia directly. "Ms. Stauch, you betrayed the person you loved enough to marry. You told your husband lies and took away someone he loved. The case of Gannon Stauch serves as a tragic reminder that evil can hide behind the most trusted facades. The 11-year-old boy who loved video games, basketball, and spending time with his family deserved so much more than the violent end inflicted upon him by someone who was supposed to care for him. As Albert said following her arrest, "My little boy is not coming home. We will never play Nintendo again. No more Taco Tuesdays, no more smooth-looking haircuts, and no more G-Man for the world."